This video is about the influence of Israel's military on global strategy. Subscribe for more. In the heart of Tel Aviv, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets. Major Lee Cohen stood on the balcony of her apartment, her eyes scanning the skyline, a battlefield of modernity juxtaposed against a backdrop of ancient history. As an elite operative in the Israel Defense Forces, Lee had witnessed the evolution of warfare firsthand. The lessons learned from the past had shaped her country as military prowess, establishing Israel as a significant player on the global stage. A soft chime of her phone broke the silence, pulling Lee back to the present. The message was enigmatic: "We need you at the base." Intel on Europe as shifting alliances. It was an urgent request from Colonel Amir Golan, her direct superior and a strategist renowned for his unorthodox methods. Lee's heart raced. This was more than a routine briefing. It hinted at an upheaval echoing across the continent, one that could alter the balance of power forever. With determination, Lee donned her uniform, the fabric snug against her. Each piece of her gear was a reminder of the responsibility she bore not just to her country, but to an entire legacy of those who had fought and fallen. The military base was a hive of activity as she arrived, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Soldiers moved swiftly, preparing for what was already being whispered about as a critical operation. Colonel Golan was waiting in the command tent, his expression grave. A massive digital map of Europe illuminated the space, dotted with markers indicating troop movements and intelligence reports. "Lee, we are on the brink of something significant. The USA's latest maneuvers in Europe have caught the attention of our allies and enemies alike. Germany's response could shift the entire strategy." Lee leaned closer, studying the map. "What do we know about their intentions? The Germans are re-evaluating their defense policy, especially with the rise of Eastern tensions. They've been holding secret meetings with NATO leaders, and there are rumors of a new military partnership between Berlin and Washington that could jeopardize our position." An uneasy silence filled the room. Lee's thoughts raced. The strength of the US and Germany combined could create a formidable barrier against any threats in the region, isolating Israel. If they decide to bolster their eastern defenses, we could be left vulnerable to aggression from Hamas and Hezbollah, or worse, Iran. We must act. Ugala nodded, his eyes piercing through the layers of strategy. "Exactly. We're redeploying a reconnaissance unit to gather intel on this partnership. Your team will infiltrate their communications network. We need to understand their intentions before we can counter them." The weight of the mission settled on Leah's shoulders. She gathered her team a diverse mix of seasoned operatives and fresh recruits. Among them was Avi, a cybersecurity expert whose skills could tip the scale in their favor, and Noah, a former combat soldier with a knack for tactical operations. Each member brought unique strengths, and together they formed a unit that had tackled challenges head-on in the past. As they prepared for the operation, Lee briefed them on the stakes. "If we can identify their weaknesses, we can leverage our relationships with other nations to counterbalance their power." Avi's fingers danced across his tablet, pulling up data streams and encrypted messages. "It's not just military logistics, there are discussions about technology transfers and joint exercises. If they solidify this alliance, we need to be ready for anything." And Noah, ever the realist, chimed in. "We're talking about the resurgence of European militarization, something we've seen before. Remember the echoes of history, the alliances that led to the world wars. We need to tread carefully." They felt the weight of history pressing down on them. The echoes of World War II lingered in the air, a reminder of how quickly alliances could shift and how devastating the consequences could be. The world had seen the rise of fascism, the devastation of war, and the aftermath that left scars on nations. The last thing she wanted was for history to repeat itself in a way that would jeopardize Israel's existence. As night fell, the team's resolve hardened. They slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly through the streets of Tel Aviv, heading toward the designated extraction point, a nondescript warehouse where a transport helicopter awaited. The hum of the rotors grew louder as they approached, the machine ready to lift them into the unknown. Once airborne, Leah's thoughts turned to the delicate balance of international relations. The USA, Germany, and Israel had tangled histories, often fraught with tension yet bound by necessity. The United States had been a staunch ally to Israel, providing military support and intelligence that had kept the nation safe against various threats. But Germany's newfound assertiveness brought unpredictability. If their partnership with the US flourished, it could lead to a new era where Israel might find itself sidelined. The helicopter S-blade sliced through the night air, and Leah's heart raced with anticipation. They made their way toward a suspected NATO communications hub located in a remote region of eastern Germany. The mission was fraught with danger. If discovered, they could spark a diplomatic crisis that would reverberate across the globe. As they landed, the team quickly set up a perimeter. Lee's focus sharpened. She could sense the tension in the air, every nerve in her body attuned to the slightest sound. They moved like shadows, slipping into the facility with precision. The sterile hallways echoed with their footsteps, and Lee signaled for silence. Evie worked quickly, bypassing security systems while Noah kept watch. Lee felt the weight of history again, a palpable tension reminiscent of the Cold War, where espionage was a game of survival and every piece of intelligence could tip the scales. The room filled with a hum of computers as Abby decoded the encrypted messages. Hours passed, and just as fatigue began to settle, the screen lit up with detailed documents outlining NATO's military exercises, plans for the Baltic region, and strategies regarding Israel's military capabilities. Leah's breath caught in her throat. This was the intel they needed, but it also revealed a troubling truth. Germany was preparing for a more aggressive stance in Europe, one that could have dire implications for Israel. Lee, you need to see this. Avi's voice broke into her thoughts, urgency lacing its tone. They were discussing direct artillery support to Eastern allies. If Germany commits to this, it is not just a shift in power, it is an escalation. Lee's mind raced with the implications. The intertwining of military strategies could lead to a new conflict, one that would engulf not just Israel, but all of Europe. The balance of power was on a knife's edge, and they were standing right on it. Suddenly, alarms blared through the facility, shattering the silence. We've been compromised. No shouted, adrenaline surging as they scrambled to gather the data. Leah's instincts kicked in. They couldn't leave empty-handed. This intel was crucial. With the echoes of sirens ringing in their ears, Lee led the team through the maze of hallways, weaving around guards and security protocols. They reached the extraction point, but as they approached the exit, they were met by a wall of German soldiers, rifles raised. "Drop your weapons," one of them shouted. Leah's heart pounded, the weight of the mission crashing down on her. They couldn't surrender. Not now. Lee yelled, pushing her team back as she prepared to hold the line. The tension snapped, and gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing in the dim hallway. They were fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for Israel's future in a rapidly changing world. As they fought, Lee's mind raced through scenarios and strategies, piecing together the fragments of a complex puzzle where alliances were shifting and histories were intertwining. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome of this confrontation could redefine the global landscape. With their backs against the wall, they fought their way out, bursting through a side exit and into the cool night air. The helicopter roared overhead, lights flashing as it descended. But the battle was far from over. Just before they could board, Lee turned back, adrenaline surging through her veins. "We need to warn Israel. If this alliance strengthens, we must prepare for the worst." The determination in her voice was palpable, echoing the resolve of every soldier who had fought for their nation. As the helicopter lifted off, the skyline of Germany faded into the distance, but the shadows of war were closing in. The mystery of new alliances loomed, and the fight for Israel's place in the world had only just begun. The real question lingered. Would they have the strength to uncover the truth before it was too late? Part 2 would plunge deeper into the complexities of these alliances, revealing the hidden agendas of the powerful and the dangerous scheme of espionage that lay ahead. As the helicopter soared away from the German countryside, Lee's pulse raced with a mix of triumph and dread. They had secured vital intel, but the implications of their findings weighed heavily on her mind. The alliance between the USA and Germany was more than a mere political maneuver. It was a potential shift in the global balance of power, one that could isolate Israel and leave it vulnerable. The darkened landscape below faded into the distance as they headed back to Tel Aviv. The stars twinkled in the vast night sky, but Lee felt a storm brewing, the undercurrents of history threatening to surge forth. She turned to her team, their expressions a mirror of her own unease. "This isn't just about us anymore. The stakes have never been higher." As they touched down on the military base, Lee immediately convened a debriefing in the operations room. A large screen displayed the documents Abby had retrieved, detailing Germany's military intentions and exercises planned in tandem with NATO. Colonel Garland stood at the forefront, his authoritative presence commanding the room. "What you've brought back is critical. It changes everything." Lee took a breath, her mind racing through the possibilities. If they proceed with artillery support for Eastern allies, it could embolden aggressors like Iran and Hezbollah to make their moves against us. Garland nodded, a frown creasing his brow. We have to solidify our relationships with other powers before it is too late. I want you to reach out to our allies in the region, particularly with the Gulf states and even Russia. They might see a benefit in countering this newfound aggression. Lee's heart sank at the thought of enlisting Russia, a country with its own imperial ambitions. History bore witness to the ramifications of alliances forged in desperation, often leading to betrayals and bloodshed. Noah chimed in, his voice steady. If we approach Russia, we need to tread carefully. They have their agenda, and it often runs counter to ours, but we can't afford to be rigid. Flexibility is key right now. Ivy interjected, his eyes darting across the screen. Germany's discussions about tech transfers could lead to advanced weaponry being developed that could threaten us directly. We need to understand what they were working on. Colonel Gall and S.G. Sharpen. Lee, I want you to gather a team and infiltrate German defense contractors. We need to know exactly what technology is being shared and how it could impact us. Time is of the essence. They might ramp up production sooner than we anticipate. Lee felt the weight of these orders, the urgency of their situation pressing down on her. Understood, I'll assemble a team right away. As her colleagues dispersed to begin their preparations, Lee's thoughts turned inward. The intertwining threads of past and present danced in her mind, a reminder of the precarious nature of alliances throughout history, a landscape marred by wars sparked by betrayal. As night turned to dawn, Lee and her newly formed team set to work. This mission required a different skill set, blending traditional espionage with modern cyber capabilities. Avi, whose expertise was now even more crucial, once again found himself at the center of the operation. I've been doing intel dumps and tracking movements from several German defense contractors, he explained. We need to get into their systems and extract sensitive information without raising alarms. The operation required careful planning. They decided to approach a facility near Stuttgart, where rumors of collaborative projects between German contractors and the American military had surfaced. This was a high-risk location, heavily guarded, and Lee knew they had to be prepared for anything. In the days leading up to the operation, they conducted reconnaissance missions, mapping out the facility's security protocols while familiarizing themselves with the surrounding area. Lee relied on her combat training, combining her tactical skills with Avi's technical prowess to create a robust strategy. Finally, the day came. Under the cover of darkness, they made their way to Stuttgart, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Lee's instincts were sharp as they approached the facility, the air thick with tension. The team navigated through the shadows, slipping past sentries and surveillance cameras with practiced ease. This was their element of moving undetected through hostile territory, gathering intelligence like ghosts in the night. As they reached the heart of the facility, Lee signaled for silence, her team falling still. Avi set up his equipment, fingers flying over the keyboard as he cracked the security codes. "We're in," he said, excitement palpable in his voice. "Downloading now." The room filled with the whir of machinery and the tense silence of anticipation. Lee focused on her surroundings, keeping watch for any signs of danger. The stakes were immense. If they were discovered, it wouldn't just be them on the line. It could spiral into a diplomatic crisis that could engulf Israel and its allies. Avi's brow furrowed. "This is more than I expected. There's a lot of data here, plans for joint defense initiatives, tech development, even troop deployments to Eastern Europe. It's all linked to their new strategy." Lee leaned closer, scanning the information unfold before her. Each detail painted a clear picture of the encroaching threat from Germany's partnership with the USA. Suddenly, alarms began to blare, shattering the stunned silence. "We've been made," Noah shouted, adrenaline surging. The facility was locking down. "We need to move now." They scrambled to secure the data, but Lee knew there was no time. "Grab what you can, we're leaving." They burst into the corridor, racing against time as they maneuvered around guards rushing to contain the breach. Gunfire erupted, shattering glass and echoing through the halls. Lee's instincts kicked in. She led the team down a back exit, navigating the maze-like structure with urgency. Just as they reached the outer perimeter, they encountered a group of soldiers blocking their path. Lee's heart raced as she assessed the situation. "No, keep them distracted. Avi, get the data to the extraction point." Without hesitation, Noah charged, drawing fire away from his team while Lee and Avi ducked for cover. The chaos unfolded rapidly. Lee's mind was a flurry of calculations and decisions as they moved with practiced precision. In this moment of conflict, she felt the weight of her nation resting on her shoulders, the legacy of those who had come before her urging her onward. The shadows of history loomed large, reminding her of the battles fought and the lives lost in the quest for survival. As they reached the extraction point, Avi managed to transmit the data just in time. The helicopter rode in, the rotor blades whipping up dust and debris, creating a shield of chaos in their escape. They climbed aboard, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they took off into the night sky. Panting heavily, Lee took a moment to process their narrow escape. They had the intel they needed, but the implications were clear. They were now entangled in a web of dangers, with the USA and Germany's alliance threatening to reshape their world. Churning clouds of war loomed on the horizon, and from the shadows, Lee felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Would they be able to outmaneuver this growing threat? The game of alliances was just beginning, and Lee knew that the next move could define the future of Israel in a world filled with uncertainty. As the helicopter climbed higher, Lee's resolve hardened. They would unveil the truth behind these alliances, no matter the cost. The fight for Israel's future had only just begun, and it would take courage, cunning, and sacrifice to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. The helicopter climbed steadily into the night sky, the landscape of stuck-out receding beneath them like a fading memory. Lee sat silently, the adrenaline slowly ebbing but anxiety gnawing at her inside as they raced back to the safety of Tel Aviv. The data extracted from the German defense contractor was invaluable, but it also revealed a web of complexity that threatened to ensnare them all. Avi, huddled over his laptop, was still poring through the files they had downloaded. Lee, this data is extensive. It outlines not only military deployments, but also reveals plans to enhance Germany's military manufacturing capabilities. They are ramping up production on advanced weaponry that could be deployed across Europe. His fingers flew over the keyboard, the glow of the screen illuminating his furrowed brow. Leah's mind raced with the implications. If Germany integrates this technology with American support, we could see a shift not just in military strategy but in the very foundations of deterrence in the region. And Noah, recovering from the adrenaline surge, leaned back in his seat. A strong Germany could embolden Iran and its proxies. They might feel they can push against Israel with more aggressiveness than ever. The helicopter shook slightly as it hit a patch of turbulence, and Lee felt her heart quicken. We have to process this information and strategize. We need to prepare Israel's military and diplomatic fronts simultaneously. As they flew back, Lee's thoughts drifted to the historical context of their situation. The alliances forming in Europe echoed the past, invoking memories of the tumultuous 20th century where alliances had ignited world wars. The lesson was clear: neglecting the shifting dynamics could lead to catastrophic consequences. The very fabric of peace was woven with trust and loyalty, and if that trust was eroded, the results could be devastating. Upon landing at the military base, Lee wasted no time assembling a debriefing with Colonel Golan. The operations room felt electric with tension as they gathered around the large screen, the data Avi had extracted filling the air with dread. Golan stood, his expression serious. What we have uncovered is alarming, to say the least. Germany is not just enhancing its military capabilities, it is preparing to lead a coalition that could threaten our very sovereignty. The partnership with the USA is increasing in depth and scope. Colonel, this isn't just about Germany and the USA, Lee interjected, her voice firm. The geopolitical landscape is shifting. We need to consider how we can leverage our relationships with the other nations, especially those who may feel threatened by this new coalition. Noah nodded, adding, countries in the Gulf and even Eastern European nations might see value in aligning with us against a militarized Europe. They have their stakes in the game too. Golan crossed his arms, contemplating their suggestions. I want to reach out to our allies in the Gulf states. If we can present a united front, we may deter further aggression from Germany and the USA. Lee, I want you to lead the diplomatic discussions. Time is the essence. Lee felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Yes, Colonel, I'll coordinate with our embassy contacts and ensure we communicate the urgency of this situation. As the meeting concluded, Lee gathered her team for a quick strategy session. Avi, you'll continue to analyze the data we obtained, identify any specific technologies that could pose a risk to us. Noah, I need you to prepare operational contingencies based on various scenarios. We cannot afford to be blindsided. The team split to fulfill their tasks. Lee felt a sense of urgency coursing through her veins. She had been tasked with securing Israel's future in a world rife with shifting allegiances and growing threats. And the clock was ticking. Over the next few days, Lee worked tirelessly. The diplomatic channels were strained, and it became evident that some nations were hesitant to embrace an alliance with Israel, wary of the repercussions that could follow. The spectre of war loomed large, and many were unwilling to be drawn into the fray. As she returned to her apartment one evening, Lee glanced out at the bustling streets of Tel Aviv, the city alive with people going about their lives, blissful in their ignorance of the global tensions brewing just beyond their borders. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing that they were unaware of the precariousness of their situation. That night, Lee received a message from an unexpected source, an encrypted communication from a high-ranking official in the Gulf states. The message hinted at a potential summit to discuss mutual concerns over Germany's military escalation. The key was building a coalition that could serve as a counterbalance to the growing power of the West. Lee's heart raced as she realized the significance of this opportunity. If she could successfully navigate this summit and forge alliances, they could potentially alter the trajectory of events on the continent. The next day, she prepared to fly to the Gulf, her mind focused on the task ahead. It was a tense journey, filled with uncertainty and the weight of expectations. As she arrived, she was greeted by representatives from various nations, each carrying their own concerns and agendas. The summit began with formalities, but Lee cut through the niceties. "We are facing a common threat," she asserted, her voice steady. Germany's military resurgence combined with American support poses a risk that could destabilize the entire region. We must act now, together. The representatives listened intently, their expressions a blend of skepticism and interest. Lee laid out the intelligence they had uncovered, emphasizing the need for a united front against rising aggression. One of the Gulf representatives, a seasoned diplomat named Amir, leaned forward. "Israel has often been seen as a pariah in our region. Why should we trust you now?" Leah's heart raced, but she pressed on. "If we allow Germany and the USA to dominate the narrative, we risk not only our security but our sovereignty. We share a common goal, stability in our region. Together, we can counterbalance this." Some representatives were hesitant, their loyalties torn. But Leah's passionate appeal resonated with a few who understood the stakes. The negotiations were fraught, filled with rounds of debates and discussions that pushed Lee to her limits. Hours turned into days. Each meeting tested her ability to remain composed while articulating Israel's position and its desire for cooperation. The clock was ticking, and the whisperings of war grew louder with each passing moment. Finally, a breakthrough came. Amir and a few others agreed to draft a joint declaration of intent. It wasn't a full-fledged alliance yet, but it was a step in the right direction, a statement that recognized the dangers posed by a militarized Europe. As they signed the agreement, a sense of relief washed over Lee. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. The true test would be whether they could solidify this coalition into a robust counterforce against the looming threat. As she returned to Tel Aviv, Lee felt a weight lift while a new burden settled in its place. The world was changing rapidly, and the delicate dance of alliances was just beginning. But she understood the stakes now more than ever. This was a race against time, and the consequences of failure could mean war. Back at the base, Colonel Gallen awaited her update, his expression a mixture of hope and concern. Lee took a deep breath, ready to share the developments in the Gulf. "We have a tentative agreement. It is not perfect, but it is a start. We have allies who understand the danger posed by Germany's military resurgence." Gallen nodded, the weight of the world resting heavily on his shoulders. "This is a significant step, Lee, but we must remain vigilant. Germany's next moves could define the future of our region." Lee knew the fight was far from over. They were threading through a labyrinthine web of alliances and enmities, where one wrong move could ignite a conflagration. As she stood there, a profound realization hit her. History was unfolding before her eyes, and she was right in the middle of it. But as the shadows of impending conflict loomed closer, a new message from Abby flashed on her phone, a notification that would change everything. "Lee, we've intercepted communications about the military exercise planned by Germany next week. It is bigger than anything we anticipated. We need to act, and fast." The urgency in Abby's message sent a chill down Lee's spine. They had uncovered the next piece of the puzzle, but it only deepened the stakes. The window of opportunity was closing, and they had to move swiftly. The battle for Israel's future was just beginning, and each decision could lead them closer to war or offer a sliver of hope. The question hung in the air: could they navigate this treacherous landscape before it was too late? Lee's heart raced as she absorbed Abby's message. The urgency in his tone resonated with the tension that had been building since their mission in Germany. This wasn't just another piece of intelligence. It was a potential flashpoint that could ignite the already fraught relations in Europe. "Colonel Gallen needs to know about this immediately," Lee said, determination fueling her voice. The implications of a large-scale military exercise were enormous. It could be a show of strength, or a rehearsal for something more sinister, or even a precursor to a shift in NATO's strategic posture in Europe. They had to act decisively. Within moments, Lee gathered her team again, urgency pulsating through the air as they settled into the familiar operations room. Galen's presence loomed large, his expression a mixture of concern and resolve as Lee laid out the details. Avi intercepted communications about a massive military exercise planned by Germany involving NATO forces. It is set to take place next week. Fallon leaned closer, studying the digital map that displayed NATO troop movements and the locations of the planned exercises. What are we looking at, Lee? How significant is this? Is significant enough to warrant immediate action? Lee said, her voice steady. Given the political climate and increasing hostility from Iran and its proxies, it could serve as a warning shot, a demonstration of military capabilities that could embolden enemies in our region. Though the timing is troubling, Noah added, crossing his arms. Germany and the US are sending a message. If they showcase their military strength, it could shift the perception of power in the region. We must respond. Galen nodded, his mind racing. I want you to coordinate with our allies in the Gulf to ensure they are aware of the impending exercise. We can let this unfold without a counter-narrative in place. Perhaps we can arrange a joint statement highlighting our commitment to security in the region. Lee felt a surge of adrenaline at Galen's words. I can reach out to Amr and the others to rally support. We must make it clear that any show of aggression from Europe will not be tolerated. As the team began mobilizing for their next move, Lee turned her attention back to Avi. What do we know about the specifics of this exercise? Any details on troop numbers, equipment, or objectives? Avi's fingers danced over his keyboard, pulling up classified documents that detailed the upcoming military exercise. They were mobilizing thousands of troops, advanced artillery units, and aerial support. This is not just about training, it's about sending a message of readiness. If we don't prepare for this, we might find ourselves facing an overwhelming force. Lee knew this was a critical moment, one that could define her nation's future. They were not just reacting to a military exercise, they were standing at the precipice of a new era of conflict where every ally counted and every decision could have monumental consequences. Days passed in a blur of frantic preparations. Lee worked closely with Amir and other Gulf representatives, crafting a united response to the looming German exercise. The coalition was fragile at best, but the shared threat was galvanizing. Together, they drafted a statement that emphasized the need for regional cooperation and a commitment to peace, while also highlighting their collective readiness to defend against potential aggression. As the date of the military exercise approached, Lee's team intensified their intelligence-gathering efforts. Every piece of information became crucial as they sought to assess how best to counter Germany's display of military power. They monitored communications, analyzed troop movements, and prepared for various scenarios, knowing that the next steps could either deter aggression or provoke it. Finally, the day of the exercise arrived. Lee stood in the operations room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and tension. The digital map showcased troop movements, as she felt the weight of history bearing down on her shoulders. This was their moment to make a stand, to assert that Israel would not be intimidated. To deploy our reconnaissance drones, Galen ordered, his voice steady. If they attempt to flex their muscles, we should be ready to respond in kind. As the drones soared into the sky, Lee watched the live feeds display the German and NATO forces mobilizing information. The sheer scale of the operation was daunting, hundreds of vehicles and soldiers moving like a well-oiled machine. Lee felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What would it take to be seen as equal to ensure that Israel's voice was not drowned out by the symphony of military might unfolding before them? Suddenly, alarms blared through the operations room, breaking the tense silence. We were picking up communications indicating a shift in the exercise's objectives. Avi announced, urgency in his voice. They were preparing for an offensive simulation, targeting zones that could theoretically involve our territory or influence. This is more than just a show of strength, it is a direct challenge. A sense of urgency gripped Lee. We can let this stand. We need to prepare a statement and mobilize our forces in response. We have to show them we are ready to defend our sovereignty. The room erupted into action as Lee coordinated with military leaders to prepare for potential escalation. They needed to demonstrate that any act of aggression would not go unanswered. The coalition with the Gulf states was more critical than ever. As the military exercise unfolded, Lee's team executed their strategy flawlessly. They broadcast a joint statement with images of their unified forces standing ready in Israel, showcasing a commitment to defending their nations against any act that threatened their security. The message was clear: they were not alone, nor would they back down. Hours turned into a tense standoff, with both sides showcasing their capabilities. Lee watched as the drones captured footage of the German exercises, revealing their formations and tactics. The world was watching, and so were potential allies and adversaries. Amid the tension, Lee S. buzzed a communication from Amir. "The coalition stands firm. We are ready for whatever comes next. Our joint forces are on alert," he assured her. Just then, a new message flashed on the screen, a warning from Evie. "Lee, the Germans are escalating their maneuvers. They are moving closer to the borders of Eastern Europe, and there are whispers of a potential provocation. We need to be ready to react." With her heart pounding, Lee gathered her team. "We need to remain vigilant. If they push the envelope, we must be prepared to counter it immediately. This is a critical moment in history." As the hours passed, the tension mounted, and the exercise reached its climax. Lee's instincts were on high alert. She understood that the world was watching closely, waiting to see which way the balance would tip. And then, amidst the chaos, a report came in: Germany had launched a simulated strike, replicating an offensive that could easily be misinterpreted as a real attack. The maneuver set off alarms across the region, and Lee felt the ground shift beneath her. "This is it," she said, her voice steely. "If they cross that line, we have to respond. History has shown us the dangers of inaction." As the situation unfolded, Lee's team mobilized rapidly. The coalition forces prepared to respond, each member aware of the gravity of their mission. They were not just defending Israel, they were standing against a tide that threatened the delicate balance of power in Europe. Minutes felt like hours as the tension reached a breaking point. Lee watched the screens, her heart racing. Finally, the German forces pulled back, their simulated strike having achieved its objective without real conflict. The threat had been averted, but the danger had never felt more real. As the dust settled, Lee felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had navigated a treacherous landscape, but the shadows of conflict loomed ever closer. The alliance with the Gulf states had proven resilient, and their collective response had sent a clear message to Germany, and the Israel would not be pushed aside. In the days that followed, Lee reflected on the events that had transpired. The echoes of history had reached a crescendo, reminding her of the intricate dance of alliances that had shaped the modern world. She recognized that the fight for Israel's future was ongoing, a delicate balance of diplomacy and military readiness. But as she stood on the balcony of her apartment overlooking Tel Aviv, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world was changing, and Israel was no longer merely a pawn on the chessboard of global politics. They were players in their own right, shaping the narrative and standing firm as guardians of their sovereignty. The lessons of history had not been lost on her. They were woven into the very fabric of her being. The future was uncertain, but Lee felt empowered, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight for Israel's place in the world would continue, but they were no longer isolated. They were part of a coalition forged through necessity, strength, and the unbreakable bond of solidarity. The shadows of war continued to linger, but Lee knew that together, they could face any storm that threatened their future. The story of Israel's military influence on global strategy was only beginning to unfold, and she was determined to ensure that they would write the next chapter on their own terms.